The Tianjin Port Disaster unfolded on the night of August 12, 2015, in the vast industrial zone of Binhai area, a region that symbolized China's rapid economic expansion and its deep integration into global trade. Tianjin Port was one of the busiest ports in the world, handling millions of shipping containers each year, operating day and night with relentless efficiency. The Ruihai International Logistics Warehouse Complex, located within the port area, was officially classified as a hazardous goods storage facility, yet it sat dangerously close to residential high-rise buildings, commercial offices and public infrastructure. On the surface, the port functioned like a modern marvel of logistics and industry, but beneath that appearance lay layers of regulatory failures, falsified paperwork, ignored safety distances, and a culture where economic speed consistently outran safety enforcement. By the evening of August 12, the conditions for disaster had already been quietly assembled through years of negligence. Inside the Ruihai warehouse, enormous quantities of hazardous chemicals were stored, including sodium cyanide, potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, calcium carbide, and other flammable and toxic substances. Many of these materials were subject to strict storage limits under Chinese safety regulations, requiring separation distances from residential zones and precise documentation regarding quantities and handling procedures. Investigators would later determine that Ruihai International Logistics exceeded legal storage limits by several times over, and that its permits had been fraudulently obtained or renewed through political connections rather than legitimate compliance. Containers were stacked improperly, incompatible chemicals were stored close together, and emergency response plans were either incomplete or non-existent. Fire suppression systems were inadequate for the chemical load present, and workers lacked proper training in hazardous material management. Yet operations continued uninterrupted, day after day, as profit and throughput took precedence. At approximately 10:50 p.m., a fire broke out within the Ruihai warehouse area. The precise ignition source was never definitively established, but evidence suggested that improper handling or storage of flammable materials led to a small initial blaze. Surveillance footage captured faint smoke rising from the warehouse roof, unnoticed by the surrounding city. Workers attempted to manage the situation internally, but the fire spread rapidly among the containers, feeding on volatile chemicals that reacted violently to heat. Within minutes, the fire grew beyond control, prompting an emergency call to the local fire brigade. What responding firefighters did not know, and what they were never fully informed of, was the exact nature and volume of chemicals burning inside the warehouse. Fire crews arrived on the scene under standard protocols for industrial fires, wearing conventional protective gear and deploying water hoses to suppress the flames. Water, however, was catastrophically inappropriate for several of the substances stored inside, particularly calcium carbide, which reacts violently with water to produce acetylene gas, a highly flammable compound. As water struck the burning containers, chemical reactions intensified rather than diminished. Firefighters moved closer to the source, unaware that they were entering an environment primed for massive detonation. Radio communications captured confusion and urgency, but not the full scope of danger. The fire continued to escalate, flames licking higher into the night sky as residents in nearby apartment towers gathered on balconies, filming the blaze with their phones, unaware that they were watching the final moments before devastation. At 11:30 p.m., the first explosion occurred. It was powerful enough to register as a seismic event, equivalent to several tons of TNT, shattering windows kilometers away and sending a shockwave through the port. Firefighters closest to the blast were instantly killed. Vehicles were hurled through the air, containers torn open like paper, and a massive fireball illuminated the skyline. Less than 30 seconds later, a second, far more powerful explosion erupted, equivalent to approximately 21 tons of TNT. This blast created a crater where the warehouse had stood, vaporized nearby structures, and generated a shockwave that traveled through the city with devastating force. Entire residential buildings were structurally compromised, roads collapsed, and glass rained down across neighborhoods miles away. In the immediate aftermath, Tianjin descended into chaos. Power was cut across large sections of the city. Communication networks were overwhelmed or destroyed. Survivors stumbled through debris-filled streets, bleeding, disoriented, and searching for loved ones. High-rise apartment complexes near the port were left uninhabitable, their interiors shredded by blast pressure, walls collapsed, ceilings torn open and furniture thrown violently across rooms. Cars burned where they had been parked, their frames twisted beyond recognition. The port itself resembled a war zone, with shipping containers scattered hundreds of meters from their original positions and massive cranes bent or toppled by the force of the explosions. Emergency responders from across the region poured into Tianjin throughout the night and into the following days. Thousands of firefighters, soldiers, medical workers, and volunteers were mobilized. Hospitals were quickly overwhelmed with burn victims, blast injuries, and cases of chemical exposure. Medical staff worked non-stop, often without full knowledge of the toxins involved, treating patients while wearing minimal protective equipment. Makeshift triage centers were established, and blood donation centers filled as citizens rushed to help. Yet the rescue effort was severely complicated by the lingering presence of hazardous chemicals, particularly sodium cyanide, which had been stored in large quantities at the site and scattered across the blast zone. As daylight revealed the full extent of destruction, fears grew regarding environmental contamination. Sodium cyanide, a highly toxic compound capable of releasing deadly hydrogen cyanide gas upon contact with water or acid, had been dispersed into soil and waterways. Authorities scrambled to locate and neutralize remaining chemical stores, deploying specialized hazmat teams and constructing containment barriers around contaminated areas. Rainfall in the days following the explosion heightened public anxiety, as residents feared toxic runoff and airborne exposure. Official reassurances were issued, but information was tightly controlled, and contradictory statements fueled distrust among the public. The human toll of the disaster continued to climb as rescue operations transitioned into recovery. Official figures eventually reported 173 deaths, including 104 firefighters, making it one of the deadliest incidents for first responders in modern Chinese history. Thousands were injured, many suffering long-term physical and psychological trauma. Entire families were displaced as residential areas near the port were declared unsafe. Schools closed, businesses shut down, and daily life in Tianjin was profoundly disrupted. Memorials began to appear at the edge of the blast zone. Photographs of fallen firefighters surrounded by flowers, candles, and handwritten messages of grief. Public anger intensified as details emerged about Ruihai International Logistics and its connections to powerful individuals. Investigations revealed that the company's executives had secured operating licenses through falsified documents and bribery, bypassing safety inspections and regulatory oversight. Storage limits had been routinely violated, and local officials had either ignored or actively facilitated these breaches. The proximity of hazardous storage facilities to residential developments was found to be in direct violation of national safety regulations, raising questions about urban planning decisions driven by economic incentives rather than public safety. The Chinese government launched a high-profile investigation, pledging accountability and reform. Senior executives of Ruihai were arrested, along with local government officials responsible for port safety supervision. State media covered the arrests extensively, framing them as evidence of decisive action. Courts later sentenced company executives to prison terms, while officials received punishments ranging from demotion to incarceration. Yet many citizens and independent observers questioned whether systemic issues had truly been addressed or whether accountability had been narrowly applied to a limited group of individuals. Beyond legal consequences, the Tianjin Port Disaster sparked a nationwide re-evaluation of hazardous materials management in China. Inspections were ordered across ports, warehouses, and industrial zones, uncovering widespread violations similar to those in Tianjin. Temporary shutdowns disrupted supply chains, highlighting how deeply embedded risky practices had become in the country's logistics infrastructure. New regulations were announced, emphasizing transparency, emergency preparedness, and stricter enforcement, though skepticism remained regarding their long-term implementation. For the families of the victims, particularly the firefighters who rushed toward the flames without full knowledge of the danger, the disaster left an unfillable void. Parents mourned children, spouses mourned partners, and children grew up with memories defined by sudden loss. Compensation programs were established, but financial payments could not restore what had been taken. Survivors struggled with survivor's guilt, nightmares, and chronic health issues. while displaced residents faced years of uncertainty regarding relocation and environmental safety. The Tianjin Port Disaster stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of regulatory failure, secrecy, and the prioritization of economic growth over human life. It exposed vulnerabilities not only in physical infrastructure but in systems of governance and accountability. The explosions were sudden and violent, but the disaster itself was slow-moving, built over years through ignored warnings and compromised standards. Long after the fires were extinguished and debris cleared, the questions raised by Tianjin continued to resonate, challenging assumptions about progress, safety, and the true cost of industrial expansion in the modern world.